Hey everyone, and welcome back to another peaceful exploration of history's hidden complexities. Tonight, we're diving deep into something truly fascinating, yet wonderfully sleep-inducing, the intricate provincial tax system of the Persian Empire. If you're new here, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you never miss these gentle journeys through time. I love seeing your comments about where you're listening from and what draws you to these ancient administrative mysteries. There's something deeply satisfying about understanding how our ancestors organized their complex societies, isn't there? Now, settle into your most comfortable position, dim those lights, and let your breathing slow naturally. Tonight, we're not chasing battles or dramatic conquests. Instead, we're going to examine something far more subtle but equally remarkable: how the Achaemenid Persian Empire, spanning from India to Greece, managed to collect taxes from dozens of diverse provinces while maintaining relative peace and prosperity for over 2 centuries. It's a story of bureaucratic brilliance, cultural sensitivity, and economic innovation that would make modern tax administrators weep with envy. Let's begin our gentle journey into the world of satraps and silver, tribute and tolerance, as we explore how Cyrus the Great and his successors built one of history's most sophisticated administrative systems. Picture, if you will, the year 539 BCE. Cyrus the Great has just conquered Babylon, and before him stretches an empire of unprecedented size and diversity, from the mountain valleys of Persia to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, from the ancient cities of Lydia to the tribal territories of Central Asia. Dozens of different peoples with their own languages, customs, currencies, and economic systems now fall under Persian rule. How do you tax such diversity? How do you extract tribute without triggering constant rebellion? How do you balance the need for imperial revenue with the desire for local autonomy? The answer lay in what historians call the satrap system, a brilliant administrative innovation that would influence governance for millennia to come. The word satrap comes from the Old Persian kshatrapavan, meaning protector of the realm. But these weren't merely provincial governors in the modern sense. They were something far more complex, semi-autonomous rulers who operated within a carefully designed framework of checks and balances, financial obligations, and cultural flexibility. The genius of the Persian system lay not in its uniformity, but in its adaptability. Unlike later empires that would attempt to impose a single administrative model across all territories, the Persians understood that diversity required nuanced approaches. A satrap governing the Greek cities of Ionia faced entirely different challenges than one overseeing the nomadic tribes of Sogdiana. The tax systems, therefore, had to be equally flexible while maintaining overall coherence and fairness. This flexibility began with Cyrus himself, whose famous cylinder, often called the First Charter of Human Rights, proclaimed a policy of religious and cultural tolerance. But tolerance wasn't merely idealistic, it was profoundly practical. By allowing conquered peoples to maintain their customs, worship their gods, and operate their traditional economic systems, the Persians dramatically reduced the cost of occupation while maximizing the efficiency of tax collection. Consider the challenge. In Mesopotamia, the economy was based on irrigated agriculture and urban craft production, with a complex system of temples that controlled vast landed estates. In Lydia, the economy revolved around gold mining and the revolutionary new invention of coined money. In Egypt, the entire system depended on the annual flooding of the Nile, and the pharaoh's divine authority over the land. In the Greek cities, commerce and manufacturing drove prosperity, while in the steppes of Central Asia, nomadic herders moved with their animals across vast seasonal territories. Each of these economic systems had evolved over centuries or millennia. Each had its own methods of surplus extraction, its own concepts of property rights, its own seasonal rhythms of production and exchange. The Persian genius was to recognize that attempting to impose a uniform system would be both impossibly expensive and economically destructive. Instead, they created a meta-system, a framework that could accommodate this diversity while ensuring that tribute flowed reliably to the imperial treasury. The satrap system thus became a delicate balance between imperial control and local autonomy. Each satrap was appointed by the king and responsible directly to him, but within their province, they wielded enormous authority. They could maintain local laws, respect traditional customs, and adapt their administrative methods to local conditions. What they could not do was fail to deliver the tribute that formed the backbone of imperial finance. The Persian tax system was remarkably sophisticated, far more complex than the simple tribute-gathering operation it's sometimes portrayed as. Modern scholarship has identified at least 6 major categories of imperial revenue, each serving different purposes and collected through different mechanisms. Understanding these categories helps us appreciate the nuanced approach the Persians took to imperial finance. First and most fundamental was the annual tribute, known in Persian as baji. This was the regular, predictable revenue that each satrap was required to deliver to the royal treasury. Unlike the irregular spoils of war or the unpredictable profits from trade, the tribute system provided the stable financial foundation that allowed the empire to function. The amounts were substantial. Herodotus tells us that the tribute from the richest provinces could amount to thousands of talents of silver annually, representing enormous wealth by ancient standards. But the tribute wasn't simply arbitrary. It was calculated based on detailed assessments of each province's productive capacity, taking into account factors like population, agricultural potential, mineral resources, and commercial activity. The Persians developed what may have been the ancient world's first systematic approach to economic surveying, with royal officials regularly traveling throughout the empire to assess resources and update tribute obligations. The second major category was military service, though this was often commuted to monetary payments. Each province was theoretically required to provide troops for the imperial army, but the Persians recognized that professional soldiers were often more effective than reluctant conscripts. Many provinces, therefore, paid additional tribute in lieu of military service, allowing the empire to hire professional forces, including the famous Greek mercenaries who served Persian interests throughout the classical period. Third came the obligation to supply the royal court when it traveled through a province. The Persian court was enormous. Herodotus describes banquets for thousands of courtiers. Each served multiple courses on golden plates. When this mobile court descended on a province, the local satrap was responsible for providing not just food and accommodation, but entertainment, gifts, and ceremony appropriate to the divine majesty of the King of Kings. These obligations could be ruinously expensive, but they also provided opportunities for local elites to demonstrate their loyalty and potentially gain royal favor. Fourth, were the special levies for extraordinary circumstances, wars, major construction projects, or natural disasters. These weren't part of the regular tax burden, but provinces understood that they might be called upon to contribute additional resources when the empire faced unusual challenges. The flexibility of this system allowed the Persians to mobilize enormous resources when needed without creating unsustainable regular obligations. Fifth came the profits from royal monopolies and estates. The Persian kings owned vast properties throughout the empire, entire cities, fertile valleys, mineral deposits, and commercial facilities. These royal lands were managed by appointed officials who were responsible for maximizing their profitability. The revenues from these properties supplemented the tribute system and provided the crown with direct income that didn't depend on the cooperation of local elites. Finally, there were the numerous fees, tolls, and commercial taxes that generated revenue throughout the empire. The Persians maintained an extensive road system, the famous Royal Road being just one of many highways that facilitated trade and communication. Tolls on these roads, fees for using royal ports and warehouses, taxes on commercial transactions, and duties on imported goods all contributed to the imperial treasury while encouraging the commercial activity that ultimately made the tribute system sustainable. The process of determining how much each province should pay in tribute was one of the most sophisticated administrative challenges in the ancient world. The Persians developed methods that were both systematic and flexible, taking into account not just raw resources, but the complex interplay of geography, population, technology, and economic development that determined a region's true capacity to generate surplus. The foundation of the assessment system was the detailed survey, or catastrophe, conducted by royal officials. These weren't merely headcounts or crude estimates of agricultural production. Persian surveyors measured land areas, assessed soil quality, counted livestock, evaluated mineral deposits, and studied trade patterns. They interviewed local merchants, craftsmen, and agricultural experts to understand the seasonal rhythms of production and the factors that influenced productivity from year to year. In agricultural regions, the surveyors paid particular attention to irrigation systems, crop rotation patterns, and the availability of draft animals. They understood that the same amount of land might produce vastly different surpluses depending on how it was cultivated. A well-irrigated field in Mesopotamia might support intensive cultivation of valuable crops like dates and barley, while mountainous regions might be better suited to pastoralism or specialized products like wine or olive oil. The Persian assessment system also took into account what modern economists would call comparative advantage. A province with access to particular resources or skills might be encouraged to specialize in those areas, with tribute obligations adjusted accordingly. Regions with gold mines might pay a higher proportion of their tribute in precious metals, while areas known for skilled craftsmen might be expected to provide finished goods rather than raw materials. One of the most sophisticated aspects of the system was its treatment of trade and commerce. The Persians understood that commercial activity generated wealth in ways that were different from agricultural production. A city that served as a major trading hub might have relatively little agricultural land, but enormous commercial revenues. The assessment system had to account for these complexities, often requiring detailed analysis of trade routes, seasonal patterns of commerce, and the profits generated by different types of commercial activity. The surveyors also paid careful attention to population demographics. A province with a large population of skilled artisans might be capable of generating substantial surpluses through manufacturing, even if its agricultural resources were limited. Conversely, a region with extensive natural resources but a small population might have tremendous potential that couldn't be immediately realized without investment in infrastructure or migration of workers. climate and natural conditions played a crucial role in the assessment process. The Persians understood that agricultural production could vary dramatically from year to year based on factors beyond human control. Droughts, floods, pest infestations, or extreme weather could devastate crops and make it impossible for a province to meet its normal tribute obligations. The assessment system therefore built in flexibility to account for these natural variations. The process of assessment wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing administrative function. Royal officials regularly updated their surveys, taking into account changes in population, improvements in agriculture or manufacturing, the development of new trade routes, or the discovery of new resources. This dynamic approach meant that tribute obligations could be adjusted as conditions changed, preventing the system from becoming rigid and ultimately counterproductive. Perhaps most importantly, the assessment system recognized that different types of wealth required different approaches to taxation. Agricultural wealth was relatively predictable and could be assessed based on land quality and cultivation methods. Commercial wealth was more volatile, but potentially more lucrative, requiring different timing and methods of collection. Mineral wealth was often substantial but finite, requiring long-term planning to ensure sustainable extraction. The genius of Persian provincial administration lay not just in the sophistication of their tax assessments, but in the delicate balance they struck between imperial control and local autonomy. The satrap system represented one of history's most successful attempts to govern a diverse empire through a combination of central authority and regional flexibility. Each satrap was, in effect, a semi-autonomous ruler within their province. They commanded local military forces, administered justice according to local customs and Persian law, managed public works projects, and maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring regions. Within their territory, they wielded power that was nearly absolute. They could raise armies, build cities, negotiate treaties, and even mint coins bearing their own names and images. But this autonomy came with strict limitations and careful oversight. The most important constraint was the annual tribute obligation. Regardless of how they chose to govern their provinces, satraps were absolutely required to deliver the specified amount of tribute to the royal treasury. Failure to meet this obligation was one of the few offenses that could result in immediate dismissal or execution, regardless of the satrap's other accomplishments or the specific circumstances in their province. The tribute system thus served as both a source of revenue and a mechanism of control. By setting tribute levels that required efficient administration and economic development, the Persians ensured that satraps had strong incentives to govern effectively. A satrap who allowed their province to fall into economic decline would quickly find themselves unable to meet their tribute obligations, with predictable consequences for their career and their life. To prevent satraps from becoming too independent, the Persians developed an elaborate system of checks and balances. While the satrap controlled the civilian administration, military commanders often reported directly to the king rather than to the provincial governor. Royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes and ears, traveled throughout the empire to monitor the performance of satraps and report any signs of disloyalty or incompetence. The tribute collection process itself provided another layer of oversight. Royal officials were responsible for receiving and transporting the tribute from each province to the central treasury. These officials served as an independent check on the satrap's administration, reporting not just on the amount of tribute collected, but on the methods used to collect it and the general condition of the province. Perhaps most importantly, the Persian system recognized that successful provincial administration required local knowledge and cultural sensitivity. Most satraps were either members of local elite families or Persians who had spent years learning local languages and customs. They were expected to understand the economic, social, and cultural factors that influenced their province's productivity and to adapt their administrative methods accordingly. This cultural sensitivity extended to the tribute collection process itself. In some provinces, tribute was collected in kind: grain, livestock, precious metals, or manufactured goods. In others, it was collected in silver or gold, requiring provinces to engage in trade to obtain the necessary currency. The Persians understood that different regions had different comparative advantages and structured their tribute obligations to take advantage of these strengths rather than forcing all provinces into a uniform system. The satrap system also provided opportunities for career advancement and cultural exchange that helped bind the empire together. Successful satraps might be promoted to govern larger or more important provinces, while their children might be educated at the royal court and eventually appointed to positions throughout the empire. This created a network of Persian and local elites who had personal stakes in the empire's success. The Persian tribute system had profound effects on the economic development of the empire, many of which were intentional and beneficial, while others were unintended consequences that shaped the empire's long-term trajectory. Understanding these impacts helps us appreciate both the sophistication of Persian administration and the challenges inherent in governing such a vast and diverse territory. One of the most significant impacts was the monetization of the economy. While coined money had been invented in Lydia in the 7th century BCE, it was the Persians who first systematically promoted its use across a large territory. The tribute system required provinces to convert their local products into silver or gold, creating a massive demand for precious metals and encouraging the development of markets where goods could be exchanged for currency. This monetization had cascading effects throughout the empire. Farmers who had previously operated in largely subsistence economies now had incentives to produce surpluses that could be sold for silver to help meet tribute obligations. Artisans and craftsmen found new markets for their products as the demand for goods that could be converted to currency expanded. Merchants developed new trade routes and commercial networks to facilitate the movement of goods and precious metals across the empire. The Persian road system, built primarily for military and administrative purposes, became a crucial infrastructure for this expanding commercial network. The famous Royal Road, stretching from Sardis to Susa, was just one of many highways that connected the empire's diverse regions. These roads not only facilitated the movement of tribute to the royal treasury, but also enabled the commercial exchanges that made the tribute system economically sustainable. The standardization of weights and measures across the empire was another crucial development. While the Persians allowed local variations in many aspects of administration, they insisted on standardized measures for tribute calculations. This standardization facilitated trade and commerce far beyond the immediate needs of tax collection, creating a more integrated economic system that benefited both the imperial treasury and local populations. The tribute system also had important effects on agricultural development. Provinces that specialized in agricultural production had strong incentives to improve their farming techniques, develop better irrigation systems, and cultivate more valuable crops. The Persian administration often provided technical assistance and investment in agricultural infrastructure, recognizing that more productive agriculture would ultimately generate higher tribute revenues. Similarly, provinces with mineral resources were encouraged to develop mining operations, often with direct Persian investment or technical assistance. The empire's demand for precious metals to support the tribute system created incentives for mining development that might not have existed otherwise. This led to the discovery and exploitation of new mineral deposits throughout the empire. The Persian tax system also had significant effects on urban development. Cities that served as provincial capitals or major commercial centers grew rapidly as they became focal points for tribute collection and the commercial activities that supported it. These urban centers became cosmopolitan melting pots where Persian administrators, local elites, merchants from throughout the empire, and skilled craftsmen from diverse backgrounds interacted and exchanged ideas. However, the tribute system also created some economic distortions and challenges. The constant drain of precious metals to the royal treasury meant that many provinces experienced chronic shortages of currency, which could hamper local trade and economic development. The system also created incentives for provinces to focus on the production of goods that could easily be converted to tribute payments, sometimes at the expense of more diverse economic development. Behind the sophisticated administrative systems and impressive revenue figures of the Persian tribute system lay a more complex human reality. The tax burden fell unevenly across different social classes and regions, creating winners and losers whose experiences shaped the empire's social and political development in profound ways. For the wealthy elites, who served as intermediaries between the Persian administration and local populations, the tribute system often provided opportunities for enrichment and advancement. Local aristocrats, who could effectively organize tribute collection and maintain order in their regions, might be rewarded with Persian titles, land grants, or positions in the imperial administration. These elites often found ways to shift the burden of tribute collection to lower social classes, while retaining a significant portion of the collected wealth for themselves. The merchant classes generally benefited from the Persian system, as the empire's roads, standardized measures, and commitment to trade security created unprecedented opportunities for commercial activity. Merchants who could navigate the complex networks of Persian administration and local customs might accumulate enormous wealth. Some became so successful that they could afford to loan money to satraps or even to the royal treasury itself, creating a class of international financiers who operated across the entire empire. For skilled craftsmen and artisans, the Persian system created both opportunities and challenges. The demand for luxury goods to satisfy the tribute obligations and the tastes of Persian administrators created new markets for high-quality products. Artisans who could produce goods that appealed to Persian tastes might find themselves with more work than they could handle. However, the tribute system also created pressure to produce goods quickly and cheaply, sometimes at the expense of traditional craftsmanship and quality. The agricultural population, which comprised the vast majority of the empire's inhabitants, experienced the tribute system in more varied ways. In some regions, Persian rule brought improvements in irrigation, agricultural techniques, and access to markets that increased both productivity and living standards. Persian administrators often invested in agricultural infrastructure, recognizing that more productive agriculture would ultimately generate higher tribute revenues. However, in other regions, the tribute burden fell heavily on agricultural communities that had little capacity to absorb additional taxation. Peasant farmers, who were already living close to subsistence levels, might find themselves unable to meet their tribute obligations without selling their land, livestock, or even family members into slavery. The Persian system, despite its sophistication, could not entirely eliminate the fundamental tension between the empire's need for revenue and the population's capacity to pay. The tribute system also created complex relationships between different ethnic and religious groups within the empire. The Persian policy of religious tolerance meant that tribute obligations were generally imposed without regard to religious affiliation, but local elites sometimes used their positions in the tribute collection system to favor their own communities or to discriminate against traditional rivals. Seasonal variations in agricultural production created particular hardships for rural populations. In years of drought, flood, or pest infestation, communities might find themselves unable to meet their tribute obligations, despite having produced as much as possible under difficult circumstances. While the Persian system theoretically allowed for adjustments in tribute levels based on natural disasters, the practical implementation of this flexibility varied greatly depending on the competence and compassion of local administrators. The tribute system also affected family structures and social relationships in complex ways. The need to generate cash to pay tribute obligations sometimes forced families to send members to work in distant cities or to specialize in cash-producing activities that took them away from traditional agricultural or craft work. These economic pressures could strengthen family bonds as members worked together to meet tribute obligations, but they could also strain relationships and disrupt traditional social patterns. Women's roles in the economy were also affected by the tribute system, though these effects varied greatly across different regions and social classes. In some areas, women became more involved in commercial activities as families sought to diversify their income sources. In others, the tribute burden increased pressure on women to contribute to agricultural production or handicraft manufacturing. The Persian system's flexibility meant that these adaptations took different forms in different cultural contexts. Perhaps most significantly, the tribute system created a complex psychology of imperial citizenship. Populations throughout the empire had to balance their local loyalties and traditions with their obligations to a distant Persian king. This balancing act required constant negotiation and compromise, creating a distinctive imperial culture that was neither purely Persian nor purely local, but something new and hybrid. The Persian Empire's tax system required an enormous administrative apparatus to function effectively across such a vast and diverse territory. The Persians developed one of the ancient world's most sophisticated bureaucratic systems, with layers of oversight and control that ensured both efficiency and accountability in tribute collection. At the apex of this system stood the royal treasury, located in the capital cities of Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana. The treasury was managed by high-ranking officials who reported directly to the king and were responsible for receiving, cataloging, and storing the tribute from all provinces. These officials maintained detailed records of tribute payments, tracking not just the amounts received, but the methods of collection, the quality of goods delivered, and the reliability of different provinces in meeting their obligations. The treasury officials also served as the empire's financial planners, analyzing tribute receipts to identify trends and potential problems. They could detect when a province was experiencing economic difficulties, when a satrap was skimming excessive profits, or when changing conditions might require adjustments to tribute levels. This analysis informed royal policy decisions about everything from military campaigns to infrastructure investments. Between the provincial level and the royal treasury operated a network of regional inspectors and financial auditors. These officials, known as the king's eyes and ears, traveled throughout the empire on regular circuits, monitoring the performance of satraps and investigating any irregularities in tribute collection. Their reports provided the king with independent information about conditions in the provinces, helping to prevent the formation of autonomous power centers that might threaten imperial unity. The inspectors were carefully chosen for their loyalty to the crown and their expertise in financial administration. Many were members of the Persian nobility who had been educated at the royal court and had extensive experience in imperial administration. Others were drawn from the professional scribal class, individuals who had spent their careers managing the complex records and calculations required by the tribute system. These inspectors had broad authority to investigate any aspects of provincial administration that might affect tribute collection. They could examine financial records, interview local officials and merchants, and even conduct their own assessments of provincial resources. Their reports were detailed and comprehensive, covering not just the financial aspects of provincial administration, but also political conditions, social tensions, and economic developments that might affect future tribute payments. The inspection system served multiple purposes beyond simple oversight. Inspectors often served as conduits for communication between the royal court and the provinces, carrying messages, policy directives, and royal decrees. They also served as advisors to satraps, providing expertise and guidance on administrative challenges. This dual role helped to integrate the provinces more fully into the empire while maintaining the independence and authority of the satrap system. The Persian administrative system also included specialized officials responsible for particular aspects of tribute collection. Royal engineers oversaw the construction and maintenance of roads, bridges, and other infrastructure that facilitated the movement of tribute. Royal surveyors conducted the detailed assessments that determined tribute levels. Royal guards protected tribute convoys during transport to the treasury. Royal scribes maintained the extensive records required to track tribute payments and provincial conditions. The administrative system was supported by an extensive communications network that enabled rapid transmission of information across the empire. The famous postal system, with its relay stations and swift horses, allowed royal officials to send messages from the capital to the most distant provinces in a matter of days rather than months. This communications network was essential to the effective operation of the tribute system, enabling the rapid transmission of tribute assessments, payment schedules, and policy directives. The Persian administrative system also made extensive use of local knowledge and expertise. While the overall framework was established by the royal court, local officials were expected to understand the specific conditions in their regions and to adapt their methods accordingly. This required a complex balance between standardization and flexibility, with royal officials providing oversight while allowing local administrators the freedom to innovate and adapt. The Persian tribute system was not merely an economic arrangement, but a complex cultural phenomenon that reflected and shaped the empire's distinctive approach to governing diverse populations. Understanding the cultural dimensions of tax collection helps us appreciate why the Persian system was so successful and why it left such a lasting impact on subsequent administrative traditions. The Persians understood that taxation was not just about extracting resources, but about maintaining legitimacy and social order. The tribute system was therefore embedded in a broader cultural framework that emphasized the reciprocal obligations between rulers and subjects. While provinces were required to pay tribute, the Persian king was expected to provide protection, justice, and prosperity in return. This concept of reciprocal obligation was fundamental to Persian political culture and helped to legitimize the tribute system in the eyes of subject populations. The cultural dimension of tribute collection was particularly evident in the ceremonial aspects of the system. The annual delivery of tribute to the royal court was not merely a financial transaction, but a ritual affirmation of the empire's unity and the king's authority. Tribute delegations from throughout the empire would travel to Persepolis or other royal centers, bringing not just their required payments, but also exotic gifts and demonstrations of their local customs and traditions. These tribute ceremonies were elaborate affairs that lasted for days or weeks, with delegations from different provinces presenting their tribute in carefully choreographed sequences. The ceremonies served multiple purposes. They provided opportunities for the king to display his wealth and power. They allowed provincial representatives to demonstrate their loyalty and importance, and they created a sense of shared imperial identity among the diverse populations of the empire. The Persian approach to tribute collection also reflected their distinctive religious and philosophical beliefs. The Zoroastrian concept of the king as the earthly representative of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity, provided a religious framework for the tribute system. The king's authority to collect tribute was not merely political, but divine, and the proper payment of tribute was understood as a religious as well as a civic obligation. This religious dimension of the tribute system was reinforced by the Persian policy of religious tolerance. While the Persians maintained their own religious traditions, they also supported the religious institutions of their subject populations. Tribute payments were sometimes used to fund the construction or maintenance of local temples, creating a direct connection between the tax system and religious life. This approach helped to integrate the tribute system into the existing cultural and religious frameworks of different provinces. The Persian tribute system also reflected sophisticated understanding of the psychology of taxation. The Persians recognized that the perception of fairness was crucial to the system's success. Tribute levels were carefully calibrated to be substantial enough to meet imperial needs, but not so burdensome as to provoke rebellion or economic collapse. The system's flexibility allowed for adjustments based on changing conditions, helping to maintain the perception that tribute obligations were reasonable and fair. The cultural dimension of tribute collection was also evident in the way the system adapted to local customs and traditions. In some regions, tribute was collected during traditional harvest festivals, integrating the imperial tax system into existing seasonal celebrations. In others, tribute collection was timed to coincide with religious holidays or market days, taking advantage of existing social and economic rhythms. The Persian system also recognized the importance of honor and status in different cultural contexts. Tribute collectors were instructed to treat local elites with appropriate respect, acknowledging their traditional authority while asserting imperial prerogatives. This delicate balance helped to maintain social stability while ensuring effective tribute collection. Perhaps most importantly, the Persian tribute system created a shared cultural vocabulary that helped to unite the diverse populations of the empire. Terms like satrap, tribute, and king of kings became part of the common language of administration throughout the empire, creating a shared framework for understanding political relationships and obligations. This cultural integration was one of the most lasting legacies of the Persian system, influencing administrative traditions throughout the ancient world. As we continue our gentle exploration of Persian administrative genius, let's examine how the tribute system functioned differently across the empire's diverse regions. The true brilliance of Persian tax policy lay not in its uniformity, but in its remarkable ability to adapt to local conditions while maintaining overall coherence and effectiveness. In the wealthy satrapies of Asia Minor, particularly Lydia and Ionia, the tribute system built upon existing monetary economies. These regions had been among the first to adopt coined money, and their populations were already accustomed to commercial transactions involving precious metals. The Persian tribute obligations in these areas were therefore calculated primarily in silver talents, with satraps able to collect taxes in currency rather than having to convert goods to meet their obligations. The Lydian tribute system provides a fascinating example of Persian administrative flexibility. Under Croesus, the last independent king of Lydia, the region had developed sophisticated methods of gold refining and coinage production. The Persians not only maintained these systems, but expanded them, recognizing that Lydia's expertise in precious metals could serve imperial interests far beyond the province's own tribute obligations. Lydian mints produced coins for use throughout the western portions of the empire, while Lydian refiners processed gold and silver from other regions. This specialization had profound effects on Lydian society and economy. The tribute obligations encouraged continued investment in mining and metallurgy, leading to technological innovations that increased both the quantity and quality of precious metal production. Lydian craftsmen developed new techniques for purifying gold and silver, creating alloys suitable for different purposes, and producing coins of consistent weight and purity. These innovations spread throughout the empire, contributing to the standardization of currency that facilitated long-distance trade. In the Greek cities of Ionia, the tribute system had to accommodate existing traditions of civic autonomy and democratic governance. The Persians recognized that attempting to impose direct control over these cities would likely provoke resistance and reduce their economic productivity. Instead, they developed a system of tribute collection that worked through existing civic institutions, with local tyrants or democratic assemblies responsible for raising the required funds. This approach created interesting tensions within the Greek cities. Some citizens favored closer integration with the Persian Empire, recognizing the economic benefits of access to Persian markets and the protection of Persian military power. Others resented the tribute obligations and the loss of complete independence. These internal divisions would later play crucial roles in events like the Ionian Revolt and the Persian Wars, but for most of the period of Persian rule, the system functioned effectively. The tribute system in Egypt required entirely different approaches, adapted to the unique characteristics of the Nile Valley economy. Egyptian agriculture depended entirely on the annual flooding of the Nile, which deposited fertile silt across the river valley, but also created a highly seasonal pattern of agricultural activity. The Persian tribute system had to accommodate these seasonal rhythms, with tribute collection timed to coincide with the harvest that followed the flood. Egyptian tribute obligations were calculated primarily in grain, reflecting the province's role as one of the empire's major sources of food. But the Persians also recognized Egypt's other economic strengths, including linen production, papyrus manufacture, and skilled craftsmanship in luxury goods. The tribute system therefore included provisions for payments in these specialized products, encouraging continued production and innovation in areas where Egypt had comparative advantages. The Persian administration in Egypt also had to navigate the complex religious and cultural traditions associated with pharaonic rule. The Egyptians expected their rulers to fulfill certain religious obligations, including the maintenance of temples and the performance of traditional ceremonies. The Persian kings, despite their own Zoroastrian beliefs, generally accepted these obligations, recognizing that religious legitimacy was essential to effective governance in Egypt. In Mesopotamia, the tribute system built upon thousands of years of administrative tradition. The region had been governed by centralized states for millennia, and its population was accustomed to complex tax systems and bureaucratic administration. The Persians, therefore, found it relatively easy to integrate Mesopotamian administrative practices into their imperial system. Mesopotamian tribute was calculated using traditional methods of land assessment and agricultural production estimates. The region's complex irrigation systems required careful maintenance and coordination, and the tribute system included provisions for funding these essential infrastructure projects. The Persians recognized that maintaining the irrigation systems was crucial not just for current tribute payments, but for the long-term economic health of one of their most important provinces. The tribute system in the eastern provinces, including Bactria, Sogdiana, and the regions of modern Afghanistan and Pakistan, had to accommodate populations that were often nomadic or semi-nomadic. These regions had valuable resources, including precious stones, metals, and strategic locations along trade routes, but their populations were difficult to tax using methods developed for sedentary agricultural communities. In these regions, the Persians developed tribute systems based on the seasonal movements of pastoral populations. Tribute obligations were often calculated per household or per herd, rather than per unit of land, and collection was timed to coincide with seasonal gatherings when nomadic groups came together for trade, festivals, or other social activities. The Persians also made extensive use of local elites in these regions, working through traditional tribal leaders and chiefs who understood the complex social dynamics of nomadic societies. These leaders were responsible for organizing tribute collection within their communities, often receiving a portion of the collected tribute as compensation for their services. The practical process of collecting tribute across such a vast and diverse empire required sophisticated logistical planning and execution. Understanding these mechanics helps us appreciate the remarkable organizational capabilities of the Persian administration and the challenges they faced in maintaining effective control over such distant territories. The tribute collection cycle began with the annual assessment process, typically conducted during the spring months when travel conditions were favorable and agricultural productivity could be evaluated. Royal inspectors would arrive in each province with detailed instructions from the central treasury, including updated tribute obligations based on the previous year's economic conditions and any changes in imperial policy. These assessments were extraordinarily detailed, involving not just general estimates of provincial wealth, but careful analysis of specific economic sectors and their productive capacity. Royal surveyors would examine agricultural lands field by field, noting soil quality, irrigation infrastructure, and the types of crops being cultivated. They would visit mines to assess ore quality and extraction rates, inspect workshops to evaluate manufacturing capacity, and review trade records to understand commercial activity. The assessment process also included extensive consultation with local officials, merchants, and agricultural experts. The Persians understood that effective taxation required accurate information about local conditions, and they were willing to invest considerable time and effort in gathering this information. Provincial assessments might take several weeks to complete, with teams of officials working systematically through different regions and economic sectors. Once the assessments were complete, the tribute obligations were formally announced through public proclamations in each province. These announcements included not just the total amount of tribute required, but detailed breakdowns of how the burden would be distributed among different communities and economic sectors. The Persian administration understood that transparency in tax assessment helped to maintain legitimacy and reduce resistance to tribute collection. The actual collection process typically began in late summer or early fall, after the harvest had been completed and the year's economic production could be accurately measured. The timing varied by region, depending on local agricultural cycles and economic conditions. In Egypt, collection followed the Nile flood and the subsequent harvest. In regions dependent on trade, collection might be timed to coincide with the arrival of merchant caravans or the conclusion of major commercial transactions. Tribute collection was organized through a hierarchical system that extended from the satrap down to local village leaders. Each level of administration was responsible for collecting tribute from the level below and forwarding it up the chain to the provincial capital. This system distributed the burden of collection while maintaining clear lines of accountability. At the local level, tribute collection often involved complex negotiations between imperial officials and community leaders. Village headmen or tribal chiefs were typically responsible for organizing collection within their communities, determining how the tribute burden would be distributed among individual households or families. These local leaders had intimate knowledge of their community's economic conditions and could make adjustments to ensure that tribute obligations were distributed fairly. The collection process itself varied depending on the type of tribute being collected. Agricultural tribute might be gathered at central collection points such as royal warehouses or major market towns, where it could be measured, recorded, and prepared for transport. Tribute in the form of manufactured goods might be collected directly from workshops or through merchant intermediaries who specialized in particular types of products. Tribute in precious metals presented particular challenges, as it required accurate weighing and assaying to ensure proper purity and value. The Persians developed standardized weights and measures for this purpose, with royal officials carrying certified weight sets and testing equipment. The process of verifying precious metal tribute could be time-consuming and technically complex, requiring specialized knowledge and equipment. The transportation of tribute from provincial collection points to the royal treasury was a massive logistical undertaking. Tribute convoys might include hundreds of pack animals carrying thousands of talents of silver, gold, and valuable goods. These convoys required military protection, careful route planning, and extensive supply arrangements for the personnel and animals involved in the transport. The Persian road system was crucial to the efficient transport of tribute. The famous Royal Road, with its relay stations and provisions for travelers, was just one of many highways that connected the provinces to the imperial capitals. These roads were maintained by royal engineers and protected by military garrisons, ensuring that tribute convoys could travel safely and efficiently across vast distances. The arrival of tribute at the royal treasury was itself a ceremonial occasion, with elaborate rituals marking the successful completion of another year's collection cycle. Treasury officials would carefully weigh and catalogue each shipment, recording not just the quantities received, but detailed information about the sources of the tribute and the methods used in its collection. To understand how the Persian tribute system functioned in practice, let's examine in detail how it operated in one of the empire's wealthiest and most important provinces, Lydia, with its capital at Sardis. This case study illustrates the complex interplay between imperial policy, local conditions, and administrative innovation that characterized Persian governance throughout the empire. Sardis had been the capital of the Lydian kingdom under Croesus, whose legendary wealth had made him famous throughout the ancient world. When Cyrus conquered Lydia in 546 BCE, he inherited not just a wealthy province, but a sophisticated economic system that included the world's first coins, extensive gold mining operations, and well-developed commercial networks extending throughout Asia Minor and beyond. The Persian assessment of Lydian tribute capacity was based on several key factors. First was the region's gold production, centered on the Pactolus River, whose sands contained gold deposits that had been exploited for centuries. Persian surveyors carefully measured the output of Lydian mines and placer deposits, determining that the province could sustainably produce several hundred talents of gold annually without depleting its resources. Second was Lydia's strategic position at the intersection of major trade routes connecting the Aegean world with the interior of Asia Minor and beyond. Sardis was a natural gathering point for merchants traveling between the Greek cities of the coast and the markets of Central Asia and Mesopotamia. The Persian assessment calculated that the customs duties, market fees, and other commercial taxes generated by this trade could contribute substantially to the province's tribute obligations. Third was the region's manufacturing capacity, particularly in textiles, metalworking, and luxury goods. Lydian craftsmen were renowned for their skill in working precious metals, and their products were in demand throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The Persian administration recognized that encouraging this manufacturing sector would generate tax revenues far exceeding the value of raw materials alone. Based on these assessments, the annual tribute obligation for Lydia was set at 500 talents of silver equivalent, to be paid in a combination of gold, silver coins, and manufactured goods. This represented approximately 15 to 20% of the province's estimated annual economic output, a substantial but not crushing burden that left room for continued investment and economic growth. The collection of Lydian tribute involved a complex network of officials and intermediaries. The satrap of Lydia, typically a member of the Persian nobility or a trusted local aristocrat, was ultimately responsible for ensuring that tribute obligations were met. However, the actual collection was organized through a hierarchy of subordinate officials who specialized in different aspects of the provincial economy. Gold tribute was collected primarily through royal monopoly over mining operations. While some mining was conducted directly by royal employees, much of the production came from private operators who paid fees and royalties to the imperial treasury. These arrangements provided strong incentives for efficient mining operations while ensuring that a substantial portion of the gold production flowed to the royal treasury. Silver tribute was collected through a combination of direct taxation and currency exchange. Lydian merchants and craftsmen were required to pay taxes in silver coins, which were produced by royal mints using standardized weights and purities. The demand for silver coins to pay taxes created a substantial market for Lydian mint products, contributing to the province's economic development while serving imperial fiscal needs. Tribute in manufactured goods was collected through agreements with craft guilds and individual artisans. The Persian administration identified specific products that were needed for the royal court or for trade with other provinces, and arranged for their production through negotiated contracts. These arrangements allowed craftsmen to plan their production schedules while ensuring that the imperial treasury received high-quality goods at predictable prices. The transport of Lydian tribute to the royal treasury involved a carefully planned annual caravan that traveled along the royal road to Susa or Persepolis. This caravan, heavily guarded and supplied by relay stations along the route, represented one of the largest regular movements of wealth in the ancient world. The successful completion of this journey each year was crucial not just for imperial finances, but for maintaining the credibility of the entire tribute system. The Lydian tribute system also included provisions for emergency collections during times of war or natural disaster. The province's wealth and strategic location made it a crucial resource for imperial military operations, and the Persian administration developed procedures for rapidly mobilizing additional resources when needed. These emergency procedures were used during the Greek campaigns of Darius and Xerxes, when Lydian resources helped to finance and supply massive military expeditions. The long-term effects of the Persian tribute system on Lydian society and economy were profound and generally positive. The demand for precious metals encouraged continued investment in mining technology and exploration for new deposits. The emphasis on manufactured goods spurred innovation in craftsmanship and the development of new products for imperial and international markets. The integration into the imperial road system opened new trade opportunities and connected Lydian merchants to markets throughout the known world. However, the tribute system also created some social tensions within Lydian society. The burden of tribute collection fell unevenly on different social classes, with wealthy merchants and landowners often able to pass costs on to agricultural workers and small craftsmen. The Persian administration's emphasis on efficiency and revenue generation sometimes conflicted with traditional Lydian social arrangements and customary law. The massive revenues generated by the Persian tribute system did far more than simply enrich the royal treasury. These resources were systematically invested in the infrastructure, military capabilities, and administrative systems that maintained imperial power and promoted economic development throughout the empire. Understanding how tribute revenues were used helps us appreciate the economic logic underlying Persian imperial policy. Military expenditures consumed the largest portion of tribute revenues, typically accounting for 40 to 50% of total imperial spending. The Persian army was not merely a tool of conquest, but a complex economic institution that employed hundreds of thousands of people and stimulated economic activity throughout the empire. Professional soldiers received regular pay in silver coins, creating demand for currency and encouraging monetization of local economies. Military engineers built roads, bridges, and fortifications that served civilian as well as military purposes. Military supply contracts provided steady income for farmers, craftsmen, and merchants throughout the empire. The Persian military was also remarkably diverse and expensive to maintain. The famous Immortals, the elite guard unit of 10,000 Persian soldiers, received premium pay and equipment, but the imperial army also included Greek hoplites, Scythian archers, Phoenician sailors, and numerous other specialized units, each requiring different types of equipment, training, and compensation. This military diversity was strategically valuable but economically costly, requiring tribute revenues from throughout the empire to maintain. Infrastructure development was the second major use of tribute revenues, accounting for perhaps 25 to 30% of imperial spending. The Persian road system, with its relay stations, bridges, and maintenance crews, represented one of the ancient world's largest public works projects. These roads served military and administrative purposes, but also facilitated trade and communication that benefited provincial economies. The economic returns on this infrastructure investment were substantial, as improved transportation reduced the costs of trade and tribute collection while stimulating economic development in previously isolated regions. The Persian administration also invested heavily in hydraulic infrastructure, particularly in regions where irrigation was crucial to agricultural productivity. Persian engineers developed sophisticated techniques for canal construction, dam building, and water management that increased agricultural yields and expanded the amount of land under cultivation. These investments were funded through tribute revenues but generated increased agricultural output that supported larger populations and higher tribute payments in subsequent years. Urban development was another major focus of Persian investment. The construction of Persepolis alone required tribute revenues equivalent to several years of total imperial income, but the city served as both a ceremonial center and an administrative hub that facilitated imperial governance. Similar investments in provincial capitals created urban centers that served as focal points for economic and cultural development throughout the empire. Administrative expenses, including the salaries of satraps, inspectors, and other officials, accounted for perhaps 15 to 20% of tribute revenues. While this might seem like a substantial bureaucratic overhead, the Persian administrative system was remarkably efficient by ancient standards. The empire was governed by a relatively small number of high-level officials who wielded broad authority within carefully defined constraints. This administrative efficiency was crucial to the empire's economic success, as it minimized the costs of governance while maintaining effective control over tribute collection and resource allocation. The Persian court itself was a major consumer of tribute revenues, but it also served important economic and political functions. The elaborate ceremonies and conspicuous consumption associated with Persian royalty were not merely expressions of personal vanity, but deliberate demonstrations of imperial power and prosperity. These displays helped to maintain the loyalty of provincial elites and discouraged rebellion by demonstrating the futility of challenging such wealth and power. Court consumption also stimulated craft production throughout the empire. Persian nobles demanded luxury goods from all corners of their territories: Chinese silk, Indian spices, Egyptian linen, Greek wine, Central Asian horses, and countless other products. This demand created markets for local specialties and encouraged the development of trade networks that connected distant regions of the empire. Perhaps most importantly, the Persian tribute system functioned as a mechanism for resource redistribution that promoted economic development throughout the empire. While tribute flowed from the provinces to the imperial center, investment flowed back in the form of infrastructure development, military protection, and administrative services. This redistribution helped to integrate the imperial economy and create shared incentives for continued prosperity and stability. The Persian approach to imperial finance also influenced monetary policy throughout the empire. The massive quantities of precious metals flowing through the tribute system created pressures for currency standardization and inflation control. Persian monetary policy sought to maintain stable exchange rates and currency values that would facilitate trade and economic planning, while preventing the monetary disruptions that could destabilize provincial economies. No administrative system, however sophisticated, operates without challenges and occasional failures. The Persian tribute system faced numerous difficulties during its 2 centuries of operation, and examining how Persian administrators responded to these challenges reveals both the strengths and limitations of their approach to imperial governance. One of the most persistent challenges was the problem of seasonal and cyclical variations in economic production. Agricultural economies, which formed the backbone of most provincial tribute systems, were inherently vulnerable to weather fluctuations, pest infestations, and other natural disasters that could dramatically reduce crop yields. The Persian system had to balance the need for predictable tribute revenues with the reality that agricultural production could vary substantially from year to year. The Persian response to this challenge evolved over time. Initially, tribute obligations were relatively rigid, with provinces expected to meet their obligations regardless of local conditions. This approach sometimes led to serious hardships, as communities were forced to sell livestock, tools, or even family members to meet tribute demands during difficult years. Over time, Persian administrators developed more flexible approaches that allowed for tribute reductions during documented natural disasters or economic emergencies. The development of reserve granaries and emergency relief systems was one important adaptation to these challenges. Persian administrators began maintaining stockpiles of grain and other essential commodities that could be distributed during times of shortage. These reserves were funded through tribute revenues during good years and provided crucial stability during periods of economic difficulty. The system was not always perfectly administered, but it represented a significant advance in imperial resource management. Another major challenge was the problem of maintaining accurate information about economic conditions across such a vast territory. The Persian Empire extended across thousands of miles and dozens of distinct economic regions, each with its own seasonal rhythms, productive capabilities, and market conditions. Gathering accurate and timely information about all these regions was a massive undertaking that strained the capabilities of ancient communication and transportation systems. The Persian response to this information challenge was to develop one of the ancient world's most sophisticated intelligence networks. The famous king's eyes and ears were just the most visible part of a complex system that included regular reports from satraps, traveling inspectors, merchant informants, and specialized observers who monitored specific economic sectors. This intelligence network provided Persian administrators with relatively accurate and timely information about conditions throughout the empire, enabling them to adjust tribute levels and respond to emerging problems. However, the information system was not perfect, and Persian administrators sometimes made decisions based on incomplete or outdated information. This could lead to tribute assessments that were unrealistic given local conditions, creating hardships for provincial populations and potentially threatening the stability of imperial control. The Persian system had to balance the need for central coordination with the reality that detailed local knowledge was often more accurate than reports from distant observers. The problem of corruption and administrative abuse was another persistent challenge. The tribute system created numerous opportunities for officials to enrich themselves at the expense of both the imperial treasury and provincial populations. Satraps might skim portions of tribute payments before forwarding them to the royal treasury. Local officials might demand additional payments beyond the officially required tribute. Military commanders might use their positions to extort resources from civilian populations. The Persian response to corruption was multifaceted. The system of rotating appointments meant that officials rarely remained in the same position long enough to develop extensive corrupt networks. The use of independent inspectors provided oversight and accountability. The practice of requiring substantial security deposits from high-ranking officials created financial incentives for honest administration. Severe punishments for detected corruption, including execution and property confiscation, served as deterrents. Despite these measures, corruption remained a problem throughout the Persian period. Some level of unofficial taxation and administrative abuse was probably inevitable in such a large and complex system. The Persian approach was to minimize corruption rather than eliminate it entirely, focusing their efforts on preventing abuses that could threaten the overall stability and effectiveness of the tribute system. The integration of newly conquered territories presented ongoing challenges for the tribute system. Each new region brought its own economic systems, cultural traditions, and administrative practices that had to be integrated into the imperial framework. This integration process could take years or even decades to complete effectively, during which time tribute collection might be irregular or incomplete. The Persian approach to integrating new territories was generally gradual and flexible. Initial tribute assessments were often conservative, allowing new provinces time to adapt to imperial requirements without facing crushing economic burdens. Local administrative traditions were typically maintained and gradually modified rather than immediately replaced. Cultural and religious practices were generally respected, reducing resistance to imperial control. This gradual integration approach was generally successful, but it also meant that the tribute system was constantly evolving as new territories were added and existing provinces were further developed. Persian administrators had to balance the desire for systematic uniformity with the practical need to accommodate local variations and changing conditions. As we draw toward the close of our exploration of this remarkable system, it's worth reflecting on the lasting impact of Persian administrative innovations on subsequent imperial traditions. The tribute system developed by the Achaemenid Persians was not merely a historical curiosity, but a foundational development in the evolution of state finance and imperial governance. The concept of systematic provincial administration that balanced central control with local autonomy would influence imperial systems for millennia. Alexander the Great adopted many Persian administrative practices after conquering the empire, recognizing their effectiveness and sophistication. The Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged after Alexander's death continued to use modified versions of Persian administrative systems, adapting them to Greek political traditions and cultural preferences. The Roman Empire, though it developed its own distinctive administrative traditions, was clearly influenced by Persian precedents in areas such as provincial taxation, road construction, and bureaucratic organization. The Roman system of provincial governors bore striking similarities to the Persian satrap system, though it was adapted to Roman legal traditions and political institutions. The Roman emphasis on infrastructure development and the use of tribute revenues to fund public works projects echoed Persian practices developed centuries earlier. Perhaps most significantly, the Persian approach to governing diverse populations with different languages, religions, and cultural traditions provided a model that would be emulated and adapted by subsequent empires throughout history. The Persian policy of cultural tolerance and administrative flexibility demonstrated that large, diverse territories could be effectively governed without requiring complete cultural uniformity or centralized micromanagement. The Persian tribute system also contributed to the development of monetary economics and international trade. The empire's demand for precious metals to support tribute payments encouraged mining development and currency production throughout the ancient world. The standardization of weights and measures for tribute calculations facilitated commercial exchanges that extended far beyond the immediate needs of imperial administration. The Persian road system, funded through tribute revenues, created transportation infrastructure that continued to serve commercial and administrative purposes long after the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. The Royal Road and other Persian highways became part of the foundation for for subsequent trade networks, including the famous Silk Road that connected Europe and Asia for over a millennium. The Persian approach to record-keeping and administrative documentation also had lasting influences. The detailed records maintained for tribute assessment and collection established precedents for governmental accounting and documentation that would be adopted and refined by subsequent administrative systems. The Persian emphasis on systematic information gathering and analysis contributed to the development of what we might recognize as early forms of economic planning and resource management. Perhaps most importantly, the Persian tribute system demonstrated that effective imperial governance required sophisticated understanding of economic principles and careful attention to the relationship between taxation and economic development. The Persian recognition that sustainable tribute collection required investment in infrastructure, protection of trade, and maintenance of economic stability represented a level of economic sophistication that would not be surpassed for many centuries. The Persian system also illustrated the importance of legitimacy and consent in imperial governance. While the empire certainly used military force to maintain control, the long-term success of the tribute system depended on the willingness of provincial populations to accept Persian rule as legitimate and beneficial. This acceptance was earned through policies that respected local traditions, provided effective administration, and delivered tangible benefits in the form of security, infrastructure, and economic opportunities. The challenges and limitations of the Persian system also provided important lessons for subsequent empires. The difficulties of maintaining accurate information across vast distances, the problems of preventing administrative corruption, and the tensions between central control and local autonomy were recurring themes in imperial governance that continued to challenge administrators throughout history. As our exploration of this remarkable administrative system draws to a close, let your mind settle gently on the extraordinary achievement represented by the Persian tribute system. Across more than 2 centuries, this complex apparatus of assessment, collection, and redistribution sustained one of history's largest and most diverse empires, while promoting economic development and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Think of the countless individual decisions and interactions that made this system function. The satrap carefully reviewing tribute assessments in the spring sunlight of his palace courtyard. The village headman negotiating with his community about how to distribute their tax obligations fairly. The royal inspector traveling dusty roads to verify reports from distant provinces. The treasury officials in Persepolis methodically recording the arrival of tribute caravans from across the known world. Each of these interactions represented a small act of cooperation and compromise that contributed to a larger pattern of order and stability. The Persian system succeeded not because it eliminated conflict and competition, but because it channeled these natural human tendencies into productive purposes. The desire for wealth and status that might have led to destructive warfare was redirected toward administrative excellence and economic development. The pride and independence of local communities was acknowledged and respected while being integrated into a larger imperial framework. The tribute system also reminds us of the fundamental interdependence that characterizes all complex societies. The gold mined in Lydia supported the construction of roads that facilitated trade between Egypt and Central Asia. The grain grown in Mesopotamia fed the armies that protected the merchant caravans traveling between India and the Mediterranean. The skills developed by craftsmen in one province found markets throughout the empire, while the security provided by Persian military power enabled peaceful economic exchange across vast distances. This interdependence was not accidental, but carefully cultivated through policies that recognized the mutual benefits of cooperation and exchange. The Persian tribute system was ultimately successful because it created incentives for behavior that served both individual and collective interests. Provinces that prospered economically could more easily meet their tribute obligations, while efficient tribute collection provided the resources needed for infrastructure development and military protection that supported continued prosperity. As you prepare for sleep, let your thoughts drift gently through the vast landscapes of the Persian Empire. Imagine the slow rhythm of the seasons that governed agricultural production and tribute collection. Picture the careful preparation of tribute caravans and the ceremonial presentation of wealth to the King of Kings. Feel the satisfaction of administrators who had successfully balanced competing demands and created systems that endured for generations. The Persian tribute system was ultimately about more than taxation or imperial control. It was about creating order from diversity, building cooperation from competition, and establishing stability that allowed human creativity and productivity to flourish. These are timeless challenges that every society must address, and the Persian solutions continue to offer insights and inspiration more than 2 millennia after the last tribute caravan made its way along the royal road to Persepolis. Let these thoughts settle in your mind like the gentle accumulation of treasure in the royal storehouse, each insight building upon the last, creating a wealth of understanding that enriches your appreciation for the complexity and ingenuity of human civilization. The Persians understood that true wealth lay not merely in the gold and silver gathered in their treasuries, but in the systems of cooperation and exchange that made such accumulation possible in the first place. As sleep approaches, carry with you this sense of wonder at human organizational capability and the recognition that even the most complex administrative systems ultimately depend on countless individual acts of cooperation, compromise, and shared commitment to common purposes. The Persian Empire has long since fallen, but the principles it discovered about balancing unity and diversity, authority and autonomy continue to shape our world today. Rest well, knowing that you have journeyed through one of history's greatest administrative achievements and touched the enduring questions about how human societies organize themselves for mutual benefit and shared prosperity. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities to apply these ancient insights to our contemporary world. But for now, let the gentle rhythms of tribute collection and the distant echoes of prosperity in ancient satrapies carry you peacefully into sleep. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers through time, and may your rest be as peaceful as a Persian province in the golden age of efficient administration and benevolent imperial rule.